What makes a human human? A look at Mowgli with AM&H curator Ashley Hammond. Up next on Science Goes to the Movies. Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Lisa Beth Kovetz. Today, our guest is superhero Ashley Hammond, and I'm not talking about the yellow Turbo Power Rangers secret identity Ashley Hammond. I'm here with superhero curator Ashley Hammond of the American Museum of Natural History and the Richard Gilder Graduate School, and an expert in human locomotion. Ashley, do you get a lot of fan mail meant for that other superhero?
Not in years. No, but I did get surprised the first time I Googled my name because I didn't realize I had a superhero identity.
Superhero secret identity.
Secret identity.
Ashley and I are going to look at Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle, directed by Andy Serkis and based on the Rudyard Kipling short stories collectively called The Jungle Book. This third American movie iteration tells the tale of a human child raised by a wolf pack in the jungles of India, without any singing and dancing animals whatsoever.
You would bring peace to the jungle. But you have become a man now, Mowgli.
I'm not a man. But neither am I a wolf.
In the movie, running with the wolf pack is one of the first challenges Mowgli faces, and that poor kid is one of the slowest things on four legs. Dr. Hammond, if we can't keep up with the wolves, why stand up at all?
Well, that's a good question. It's something that we are still trying to work through scientifically. In order to really figure out why we became bipedal, we need to piece together the earliest fossil record for the human lineage. And unfortunately, this is a really tough time period paleontologically. There's just not many fossils from that time period. It's just a matter of getting people like me out there on the ground and finding more fossils.
Go be a superhero and get us some fossil records so we know. Actually, this is a fiction about a young boy who needs to run fast on four legs in order to stay in the jungle. How does that interface with some of the actual work that you're doing?
Well, I actually study how people move and how our ancestors moved based on their anatomy. And so watching this movie was actually quite fun because they had to have the main character, Mowgli, run around on all fours. And it's kind of excruciating to watch him do this. It looks so unnatural and so awkward. And that's exactly because we are not built that way. So our body is the result of millions of years of evolution to make us more efficient, upright, bipedal walkers. And so we have all sorts of adaptations that should prevent us from easily walking around on all fours. So, for instance, we have very long legs relative to our arms, right? So if you're walking around on all fours, it puts you at a bad disadvantage because you have to lean forward onto your arms.
Miserable.
Yeah, it's very miserable. We also have, hands and feet that are, especially our hands, not very well suited for being on the ground. We have kind of soft, fleshy, grasping hands, not paws or hooves or things that are better suited.
And no padding.
No padding.
Yeah.
We're just also the position of our head on our neck is adapted for upright walking. So the spine actually attaches to the base of the skull directly underneath it. And if you are on all fours, you have to tilt your head way back. So watching Mowgli was actually fun as an anatomist and paleoanthropologist because I could reflect upon the many ways that Mowgli was not suited to be in that jungle.
So did we develop big brains and then realize it would be better if we stood up and started using them?
No, actually. So if we look at the earliest hominins, actually, they don't have very big brains at all. Their brains are no larger than that of a modern-day chimpanzee. So the earliest indicators of hominins, or the human family, are actually things related to bipedality. So it looks like bipedality was really the defining trait which really sets the human lineage off on its own evolutionary trajectory.
And not the brain.
Not the brain. And bipedalism really sets the stage for all of those other things that make humans special. So, becoming bipedal allowed us to start using our hands in new ways, make and use tools, make art, and use the landscape differently. So bipedalism is sort of the original human trait.
In some of the behind-the-scenes footage, Andy Serkis talks about the actors imbuing the animals with great warmth and a rainbow of emotion, but says there were dramatic limitations on the structural realities of animal faces, so the special effects department had to add human-like bones to the animal models in order to make some basic human expressions work. Are we the only animals that use our faces like we do?
Yes, we are extremely communicative with our faces. And in fact, there are things about our face that we don't see in other kinds of animals. So, for instance, we have eyes that are very large. We have white sclera. The white portion of our eyes is visible, whereas in other animals, the white is typically concealed. So that actually serves a purpose. So by having the whites of our eyes visible, other humans can see where we are looking and take social cues based on our visible behavior, based on our eyes. We also have eyebrows. So most animals don't have eyebrows, and our eyebrows are situated in such a way that they're mobile and on a tall forehead, so they can move around. And that is another way that we give social cues to other humans.
Sure, and if you're a Vulcan, you can move one up
Yep.
and have a very specific...
Yeah. But humans also, and not just humans, but apes and monkeys have some additional muscles around the mouth. So this also adds to our ability to make special movements that give subtle cues to those around us. And I'm sure that you have noticed it just takes a quick flick of an eyebrow or a turn down of a lip to give a very large social cue to someone else,
Yes.
nonverbal.
Yes, absolutely.
So certainly we are extremely expressive. Now that being said, animals, non-human animals, communicate in all kinds of ways that we're not really attuned to. So, during evolution, we have certainly reduced our sense of olfaction. So we don't pick up on all of the chemical and pheromone cues that other animals have. Other animals do other kinds of social signaling. So for instance, orangutan males have large flanges around their face, which signals that they are the alpha male in their community. There are some animals that display vibrant colors or patterns to indicate reproductive status or social status.
But those are all big picture issues. Was it the developments in our face then that allowed us to communicate better as a group that changed us, that moved our evolution along because we could communicate details in a way?
Potentially. It's certainly part of the overall package for what makes human communication special. Obviously, we have very complex verbal communication, language, and so forth. So probably it's a number of things that come together.
Right, that orangutan face is not going to tell you how to, put that beam on that lintel and let's start making a house.
Yeah, no matter how much of the white around the eyes would be exposed, it's not something that can be communicated without language.
Right. You also studied the human pelvis. Is ours unique in its evolution?
Yeah, the pelvis of humans and our ancestors has been radically reconfigured compared to other species of primates.
Really?
So our pelvis is sort of short, and the upper portion is kind of tucked in backwards, and it's almost like a bowl that holds up all of our organs.
Now, radically reconfigured is big words for a scientist.
Yeah.
What do other animals have that's so different from that?
So when we look at most primates say, the pelvis tends to be quite long. So for instance, there's a gorilla pelvis being projected behind us. You can see how long that pelvis is compared to ours. The upper portion also flares really out to the side in a different way. The lower portion, the butt bones, they also are quite long, very different from our own. So the pelvis as a support structure is different, and certainly as a muscular attachment location, it's very different.
So what changed the pelvis of our human ancestors? Is it because we stood up and started to walk?
Yes, that is the very first thing that changes it. Over time, there are other pressures which probably played a role in the shape of the modern human pelvis. So for instance, the need to be able to deliver large brain infants. Different factors that come into play, but the original selective pressure was bipedal locomotion.
So we get up to walk, we get smarter, we get bigger brains, we have bigger brain children, and then we have to change how those babies are
Passing through.
So do other animals just have children easier? Or
Well, our easiest comparison, of course, is the great apes, because they're what we're most closely related to. And they may not be a perfect model for the kind of animal that we would have evolved from, but it looks like the birth process in a great ape is much easier. If you watch videos of things like chimpanzees or orangutans giving birth, the babies basically just kind of fall out of the mother. She kind of sneezes and there's a baby. It's not the same situation that we see with human birth.
Yeah.
Human birth is so difficult, so long and labored that it typically worldwide requires some kind of assistance from community members.
Right, but the brain is worth it.
Yep,
The brain
is worth it.
In the 1967 Singing and Dancing Because Everything is Beautiful version of The Jungle Book, Mowgli leaves the jungle because of sex. He sees a classic Disney sexed-up version of a coquettish little girl and follows her into the man village to take his place because of some unspoken communication that passed between Mowgli and the girl. But in real life, as humans evolve, did we gain or lose the ability to communicate sexual desire?
Well, things have changed a bit, particularly for female humans. So female humans no longer display that they are fertile or sexually receptive in the same way that other primates do. So we have cryptic ovulation. People around us do not know when we are fertile. That's very different from most, many monkeys and most great apes as well, where when a female in the group is ovulating or fertile, there are very pronounced external signs. So there's something called a perineal swelling, and it's the region around the vulva and the anus, and it swells up full of fluid, and it becomes very enlarged and often colorful.
So this baboon does not walk around with that all the time.
No, this monkey doesn't always have this swelling. It's really tied to when she is sexually receptive or fertile.
That would not
and then
work
it goes
for
down.
us. That would
it would be a terrible thing to have. Everyone would know when you're fertile. You'd have to have multiple pairs of pants because you'd have normal days and then fertile days. So I'm relieved that this is not something we have.
I have
to go
normal
through.
days and ate too much ice cream days, which is not the same thing.
But men they're not able to conceal their sexual interest in quite the same way that females are.
Right.
So
is that developmental, or is that just the nature of?
it's just the nature.
That's just the cut of your trousers.
Yeah.
Yeah. In earlier versions of Kipling's stories, when Mowgli enters the man village, he is where he belongs and the movie is over. In Andy Serkis' version of the story, Mowgli gets dragged into the man village against his will, where he's kept in a cage and he snarls and snaps at his captors like an animal. Mowgli is a human. He has all the parts and evolutionary DNA to be a man, but something is missing. Ashley, in real life, what are the hurdles for children who are not integrated into human life early on?
The hurdles are pretty profound, actually. So we have these stories such as Mowgli or folklore about children who are raised in the forest by wild animals. And for the most part, those are always unsubstantiated stories. But the stories that we do have, documented stories, are of children who are neglected from a very young age, often the result of very profound child abuse, where they are very socially isolated. So the most famous case is the one that's being shown behind me, Jeannie. She was a child who, from the time she was born until she was about 13, was completely socially isolated by her family. No one spoke to her, barely would feed her, no interactions at all. And so when she was taken into custody, she was unable to speak. She had a very, very low IQ, an infant's level IQ, and she never really recovered. She was never able to acquire a first primary language or even care for herself.
This was in the 1970s?
She was born in the late 50s and discovered when she was about 13.
So what makes us human is also other humans.
Yes.
In the movies, we like the story, and in the movies we make it a singing and dancing bear. But the reality of a feral child is really quite heartbreaking.
Yes, yes, and it would be very hard to overcome being socially isolated from other humans and then reintegrated into society. Almost impossible.
Right. No sweet little girl winking at you is going to make you into a human.
No.
Do humans have a lot of behaviors with no biological explanation, things that we can only learn from other humans?
Oh, yeah. Most of the things that we do defy biological explanation. I could list any number of things. So, organized sports. Why do people play rugby? Why do people build natural history museums and fill them full of artifacts and skeletons of animals? Why do we carve pumpkins at Halloween? Dancing to salsa music. The list goes on and on. The things that we do is they're very odd biologically. They often do not serve any immediate apparent purpose, but often they're related to some kind of social cohesion or reinforcing your relationships with other humans.
Is that something that is unique to humans, the non-biological desire to do something,
We see it in some other animals. Social animals play and do various things, but never to the extent that we see in humans. Humans are a little unusual in that regard.
They don't have the kind of free time that we got.
That's true.
In spite of the reality, from Princess Mononoke to Tarzan to Romulus and Remus, humans love the story of feral children brought up in the wild world of animals. In the movies, that jungle upbringing makes them more powerful, more sensitive, more natural. In real life, did we lose something in evolution?
Well, we lost things and we gained things, certainly. So, for instance, I am not very good at climbing trees. I don't have a very strong sense of smell, whereas our ancestors at some point in history were very good at those things.
Those monkeys don't have PhDs.
That's true. So there are things that we have gained as well. So certainly our cognitive abilities, our ability to imagine and project ourselves mentally into the future, and the things that we do are very different, but they're made possible by our big brains.
Are they made possible by the losses of that ferocious, feral, do you think?
Potentially. There are some ideas that humans have essentially self-domesticated, and by being friendly and having a community structure, that has facilitated much of our growth as a species.
Are humans then so very different from other animals?
We are quite different, but at the end of the day, of course, we are animals. But we are a very different kind of animal. We do all of those unusual things that I mentioned before.
Ranker, an online polling website devoted to all kinds of public opinions, came out with a list of best fictional cavemen. 8 of the top 10 were characters from the Flintstones. 1 was a Muppet. None of them are from any works created before 1920. And those early pop culture references to Neanderthals were very negative, like H.G. Wells' 1921 short story, The Grizzly Folk. But somewhere around 1955 with The Inheritors by William Golding and The Ugly Little Boy by Isaac Asimov, our sense of our Neanderthal cousins changed. And by 1992 we had characters like Link in Encino Man, played by Brendan Fraser in his first lead role. Do you think science is responsible for our changing affection and perception of the Neanderthal?
I think it's a combination of science and popular culture. So certainly science is giving us insight into who the Neanderthals were, what they were doing, what made them different from humans. But more than anything, science is showing us how much like us they actually were. That, of course, then gets taken into popular culture, so books and movies and so forth. And I think it's the popular culture that really makes Neanderthals more relatable.
Do you think when we talk about cavemen, are we talking about Neanderthals? Thank you for the pronunciation.
Well, I would just like to point out there has just been a movement in the last decade or so to try and call them Neanderthals due to the location where they were originally from, the Neander Valley in Germany. So it's a subtle distinction.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love that. Are Neanderthals cavemen? Is that?
Sure, and you know, most of the sites where Neanderthal fossils are found are actually these cave sites. So they certainly were inhabiting caves in Europe. That seems to be their preferred location to be, actually.
Are we part Neanderthal?
Yes, well, many of us are part Neanderthal. So anyone who has ancestry from Europe, North Africa, Asia, and even the Americas has some Neanderthal in their genome. And we know this based on work that's been going on for the last couple decades. So humans have had their genome sequenced, and then from fossils, actually, Neanderthal genetic material has been extracted. And we have, as of 2013, a complete Neanderthal genome. And we know now that actually anyone whose ancestry is not sub-Saharan Africa, that they have some Neanderthal in their DNA, about 2% for many people. And so this is the result actually of interbreeding between the two species, and on multiple occasions.
And in the scientific community, was that like a soap opera reveal that,
Yeah.
that because we're talking about the sexual habits of our ancestors, was that a big deal?
Yeah, no, it definitely changed our perception of the two species.
Like the Mowgli character or the Tarzan trope, these new fictional visions of the Neanderthal feature a character with raw, wild strengths. For those of us with Neanderthal DNA, is there an advantage?
We're still figuring that out. So there seems to be that Neanderthal genes that are in humans often relate to the keratin protein. So this is a protein that's found in hair and nails. So potentially it gives us some kind of advantage in terms of that, but we're still working that out. There are a number of researchers that are working on how Neanderthal genes might be enhancing our immune response, actually.
Really? Mm-hmm. Really? Well, that feeds into the trope that the wild are tougher.
Yes, but let's not give early modern humans the short end of the stick. They were really tough people too.
And we won.
Yep. Well, we are the only ones who have survived, yes.
If you were to bring a friend to the Museum of Natural History, where should they go? What should they see?
Well, after watching Mowgli, the first exhibit they should go to is the Hall of Human Origins, of course. But the Natural History Museum is a spectacular museum. We have just incredible exhibits spanning all of, vertebrate evolution. So the whole museum you should go see, of course. But I would start with Hall of Human Origins.
Really? And in the Hall of Human Origins, what would you look at first?
Well, we have a really beautiful reconstruction of a Neanderthal, actually. And that's one of the very first things that you will see when you walk in. So I recommend going to see that first. You can compare a Neanderthal's anatomy with that of our own, and perhaps even see a few bits and pieces that remind you of your own, since we are 2% Neanderthal, most of us.
When the museum announced that Dr. Hammond was joining the team, kudos came in from all over the world, acknowledging primarily your success, but also congratulating the museum for seeing those successes and taking steps to become a more balanced and inclusive institution. Do you have any advice for any young scientist or young woman moving into an alpha male field?
Yes, and I certainly, as a paleoanthropologist, I am certainly a female in an alpha male field, and I also work in Africa, which is in field research, which is challenging. So I understand the need to foster and promote diversity. My best advice for young women in the field now is to just try and stick with it, persevere. Times are really changing now, and we are a much more inclusive community, and it's getting easier, but it just takes more of us in the field to help support others like us. So that's my advice, persevere.
Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Yeah, thank you.